So this is a session on strip tillage in horticultural systems, and we've got some really good panelists. I'll introduce them in a second, and they'll also introduce themselves. So just a bit of background. This comes out of innovative trials, innovative farmer trials, and it's a field lab, and we are trying to generate some more interest in strip tillage in terms of research. So hopefully what will come out of this, our outcome will be that we will spread these trials out to a wider geographical area. I'm Pete Richardson. I've been an organic grower, field scale and tunnels for about 30 years now. And so we have Chris here as well, Chris Molyneux from Lancashire. He's also a much larger grower than me, and on 300 acres, I think, Chris. And so essentially, so strip tillage, I think, I've been talking to various people who have done some of these trials. Andy Dibben, Riverford yesterday I talked to, and it's got a sort of there's a mixed bag with the results that come out of strip tillage. And I think we need to be firming up. So that's why it's great to have Jenny and Lizzie here on the stage with us to we're going to sort of discuss and try and dig in a bit, sorry for the pun, to how this affects the soil, some of the growing techniques around strip tillage. It's a complicated area in my view as a grower, and certainly as an organic grower. So we have different systems here. Chris is not organic, but has some references to organic within his systems. So I'm hoping that we can blend all those things together. And it's sort of, in terms of where we sit with Groundswell, I think it's a really good example of how we can all work together in some ways to develop better systems and better soil health. And I've just been talking to Chris about that, and I think that's really the really important sort of lead, is that we are looking at soil health here and how we can improve and that's where we need the data to find out where we can go next and how we can make it more accessible to growers, because especially smaller growers, we can learn from some of the bigger growers, obviously, but some smaller growers just haven't got, the facilities or the capital to put into this, or even take the risk. And I think that's why people like Chris and Riverford are leaders in this field, because essentially they are big enough to take that bit of risk to look at these new innovative techniques. So if I can just pass on for the panelists to introduce themselves, they're going to get 10 minutes each, and then hopefully we can spread it out into the audience so that you can feed back to us what you want to ask and what your experiences of it is. So Chris, first, can I get you to introduce yourself?
Hi there, yeah, that's working, yeah. I'm Chris Molyneux. I grow about 350 acres of kale. The normal stuff that you've all heard of, like green kale and cavolo, and then a whole range of kales that you've probably never heard of as well, like red Russian. You might have heard red Russian. And then I do some variegated kales, and we do all sorts of colours of kales, and then we also breed our own kales as well, so we're coming up with lots of different colours and shapes and sizes, and we're looking to extend the season as well. So that's what we do, because we want to be using UK kale as much as we can, which is why we grow our own varieties. So why do I do strip till? Well, I've been, for years we were ploughing at the beginning when I first came back on the farm. Obviously we're in Lancashire, I better explain that. In Lancashire, nice black sandy soils, great for growing veg on, and we used to grow a whole wide range of veg. Traditionally you'd go and plough in the autumn, and then you'd go, and in the spring you'd work the field up, and then you'd plant your crop, and that was the conventional way of doing it. The trouble was, it was always a struggle, because you ploughed it when it was wet, it rained all winter, and you'd struggle to get on it in the spring. It's a bare soil, and when you look around, in nature, you never see soil, apart from if a mole chucks it up, or a worm does a worm cast. You don't see, it's got something growing on it all the time. So these two things came together in my head, so we need to find a way. So to start with, we went to min-till, so we stopped ploughing. So we went to sort of like, we used to just subsoil and then roterra and plant into that, which is a bit, they all thought that was crap when we first started doing it. Now everybody's doing it. So we started doing that, but there's still a problem, is you still work the soil up, you've still got bare soil, and it's still difficult to control weeds, and there's a whole range of issues. Anyway, so I was thinking, well, I saw some work in the States about strip tilling, and I thought, do you know what? This might be a way to go, because I can just leave the cover crop in place, or a crop or something growing on the field, and just work the bit I need to actually plant my crop into. And everybody goes, will that work? But I think it probably will, because the cover crop's working, everything's growing, and the soil is biologically active. Then you just strip tilt up a small bit of that up and just plant your crop into it, so you keep everything going. So I'll just move on to what we've done. So this is where we got started. You can see the picture there. Field on the left was the first time we had a go at this. We'd actually go, I'd put a rye vetch mix in. So that's a rye vetch mix there on the left. And we thought, we'll just try going straight into it and see what happens. They all thought it was crackers. But actually it worked. It was about 6 foot high when we started. The tractor pushed it down, and then the strip till pushed it forward, and then we went through it. And it looked mad, but then it died back. We left it then for a bit to die back the cover crop, and then we actually planted it. And I think I've got pictures of. There we go. You can see the pictures there. We were planted into that cover crop. Now it's great there because you see you've got all that. You've got the cover. All right, I'm a conventional farmer, so I did use some chemistry to actually destroy the cover crop. But obviously it's still there. It's still protecting the soil. And giving you, it's better than just having the bare soil or ploughing, you know. And I'll just go back, and then on the right we've got a slightly different one. We've actually the cover crop was destroyed we cultivated it. We use a machine called a biomulch, and that just sort of knocks the top off and just does about 2 inches. So you're not really disturbing the structure of soil underneath. You're working on the top and trying to just cultivate the top down and then strip till into that. So that's what we did in the one on the right there. And obviously you can see the plants going away, and another picture of us, this strip till with all this sort of trash and stuff there. And obviously they've got the growing kale on the right there. And that's, hang on, so I've gone too far. So that's basically an overview of how we got started. So the critical thing was actually trying to make it work, but the big thing is you're not going on the soil. You're not going on the soil when you don't need to. You're not working it when you don't need to, and you're just getting in there, and it just makes it. It's just better for the soil. I'm just passionate about it. Sorry, I get carried away. But anyway,
that's great.
Okay, sorry.
Well done, Chris. Thank you. That's brilliant. And I just intervened there before Lizzie introduces herself. I spoke to Andy Dibben yesterday from Abbey Home Farm. He's been involved in the innovative farm trials, and his system is very market garden. So he's making up the strips in the autumn, actually, because he's had some issues making them up in the spring. He's organic. He hasn't got the options of doing some of the things with glyphosate that other growers have got. So he has a permanent lay, and he's run into problems with some grass. So cocksfoot he had problems with killing. So this is within an organic system, and trying to kill in the organic system can be tricky. Cocksfoot.
So don't use cocksfoot.
Okay, so Chris has just confirmed that you don't use cocksfoot.
I've done it. It's hard work dealing with it.
So I think hard learning lessons there for organic growers. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is there are some very different trials going on, and the evidence from those trials is clearly going to be quite different in some ways. And one of the things that Andy is passionate about is insects and having that permanent cover and not ploughing the whole field, to get rid of, or even tilling the whole field, and having those permanent strips. But he has to do a lot of mowing. He has to time the mowings very, very carefully. And so, I think I just want to make sure that we see there's a wide range of trials going on here and experimentation within growers, and I think that's fantastic. So Lizzie, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. My name's Lizzie Sugu. I'm a soil scientist at ADAS. I work on sort of all things soil and nutrient management across a range of cropping systems. I've got to thank Carolyn for inviting me to be on the panel this morning. I think this arose out of a conversation we had quite a few months ago about how we better manage soils in these rotations, and I might have said it's something I'm really interested in, and please speak to us again. So I got the invitation to be on the panel. So let's talk about soils, okay? We're at Groundswell. I think we all know that reducing the amount that we move the soil, reducing the amount of tillage that we do is a good thing. And it is a good thing for a number of reasons. So firstly, trying to preserve the organic matter that we've got in soil. We all know that if we till the soil, we encourage mineralisation of that organic matter. And that long-term cultivation has effectively been what's driven down the organic matter levels in our soils. So if we can reduce that, that is a really positive thing to do in terms of soil quality. And taking steps, sort of a suite of steps that will help us preserve and increase soil organic matter will have a range of benefits. So improved water holding capacity, better structure, improved drainage, greater soil biology, and increased nutrient turnover. It will also, reduce the amount we till the soil should also protect it from erosion. We're building that resilience in, particularly with strip tillage, where you might be leaving that trash on the surface as well. That helps protect the soil from erosion. It's positive for soil biology. Soil biology does not like cultivation. The more we if you think you drag a cultivator through it, you're destroying its home. So the less we can move the soil, the positive benefits we'll get for soil biology. Soil structure as well, and that's a difficult one, but generally would say that the less you move the soil, you're building that long-term resilience in that we've talked about. Cultivation does destroy that natural structure. So if our soil's in a good condition to start with, and we reduce the tillage, we're helping to protect that natural structure. But structure, I think, is an important one to pause on for a minute, because these rotations are hard on soils. So we have got multiple passes of heavy machinery and crops that we quite often harvest in not ideal conditions. So compaction is a major challenge in these rotations, and it's a major threat to soil quality, soil health. So we're hard on our soils, and we're also growing crops that we know are particularly sensitive to compaction, which is a challenge in itself. Actually, can you move the slide on for me now? So I just wanted to pick up a couple, linking into that soil structure. I wanted to pull out some information that we had, sort of headline messages from a soil structure survey that we did a few years ago for AHTB Horticulture, because I think it's kind of relevant to this discussion. We went out and we did a survey of 75 fields, horticultural fields across 49 holdings. Range of crops. We looked at soil structure and soil quality, pre-planting and post-planting. We had a range of assessments. We looked at pentometer measurements, bulk density, and visual soil assessments. Can you move it on again? Okay, so a couple of headline messages from that. So this chart here shows the presence of a tillage pan in our annual horticultural crops, both pre and post-planting. What you can see that pre-planting, 63% of fields had a well-developed tillage plan, only 29% didn't. So majority of the fields have got some sort of level of compaction there. Post-planting, we went back to those same fields after they'd been planted and after they've had those cultivations. Post-planting, 42% had a well-developed pan. So those cultivations had been successful to some extent in removing that, but we've still got 42% with a well-developed pan and 21% with a moderately developed pan, and that's not great in these rotations. Just next slide as well. And the other thing for me from this project that was really interesting is we spoke to these farmers and we asked them about their cultivations in the fields that we were doing the survey of. And what it showed us is those cultivations weren't always matched to soil conditions. So we had 30, you can see here, we had 30% that were deep tilled with a pan. Okay, so they had a pan and we deep tilled them. And we had 23% that were not deep tilled and they didn't have a pan. So that section as such, you could say got it right. Their cultivations were matched to soil conditions. But we had 7% that were that was deep tilled and no pan. So that was unnecessary tillage. And we had 40% that were not deep tilled and they did have a pan. So we've got, what for me from that came out was that it was considerable scope for us to better match our soil cultivations to conditions. And I think that that's an important message into this discussion as well, because strip tillage is a form of cultivation. I think it's really important that when you're doing it, you're understanding your soil conditions. I just wanted to move on now to talk a bit about work that has been done on strip till. So a couple of bits of work and sort of feedback we've had from other growers I wanted to pick up. We did do some work for DEFRA a few years ago on strip tillage in maize that was very much focused on environmental outcomes. So we were trying to strip till into green covers. In terms of headline messages from that, in terms of an environmental perspective, great. We reduced soil erosion losses by between 60 and 85%. we significantly reduced nitrate leaching losses. We saw an increase in both below and above ground invertebrates, but we also saw a significant hit on yields. And we were very successful in getting that green cover, but that green cover was a competition for the crop, and that significantly hit yields, which I think a message from that is if you're going to go into green covers, it's managing that competition from that crop. There's also been a couple of other researchers and growers that have sort of shared some experiences with us over the last couple of days that I just wanted to pick up. One person, Thomas van der Sand from Inagra in Belgium, they're an organisation that we work with. They were telling us that they'd done some strip till trials in broccoli after ryegrass, which I will let you comment on in a minute. They found the conditions in the spring were very wet. They found that the crop residue harboured slugs, and they had a real hit on yield. They also commented that they found that the broccoli wasn't really rooting outside the strip till area. However, follow-on discussions that we've had, I think experience of UK growers is that strip till into ryegrass is probably not the crop that you want to strip till into. And I had that conversation also with James Rome from East of Scotland Growers. So they've been working on strip till over the last few years, and he had some really interesting comments to share. He was saying to us that he thinks that you can get it to work in certain crops. So for broccoli and cabbage, he thought they could get it to work in. But he said with some of the more what he called needy crops, so cauliflowers, sprouts and leeks, he said that he felt that they struggled to get the seed bed quite, the planting bed quite good enough. What he was also saying is this important of attention to detail and being flexible to the season, and that's the condition of the soil when you do it, being flexible to the season, the need to try it out and experiment and understand what works on your farms, also really important. And linking that back in, one other comment, the last one to share from a grower. I was speaking to someone yesterday, and he was telling me about they'd tried some strip tillage on maize, and he was telling me one year on their slightly heavier land, it was wet when they went in, and the slots smeared, and that really hit compaction. So I think sort of final message for me, take home, having spoken to those growers and the discussions that we've had, is that importance to experiment, understand what works for you on your soils, and that attention to detail and the ability to be flexible to the season and understand the soil.
Thank you, Lizzie. That is brilliant explanation of the soil. But as a grower, I'd just like to comment on that because it sparks up a lot for me. I'm quite tired at this time of year. We've been through 3 or 4 months of really hard crop establishment, and I always love Groundswell because it actually, and especially sessions where they challenge your preconceptions about what you're doing, and sometimes I forget what I'm doing in the field because I've done it for so many years that I just keep doing it. And in a challenging year, it's difficult, and so this is a brilliant sort of way of refiguring whether or not I need to change, but it's difficult sometimes to know how to change. So I think this explanation we're getting from some of the experts here is absolutely brilliant. Jenny, over to you.
Hi, so I'm Jenny Rowntree. So I noticed there was a bit of a typo on my name. It's not Rowbottom, which is a brilliant name, but it's actually Rowntree as in Kit Kats, if you're looking for me at all on the internet. Okay, so I'm an associate professor in ecological genetics at the University of Plymouth, which might not mean very much to many of you. Basically, I'm a plant ecologist by background, and I'm particularly interested in organisms that interact with plants, including those in the soil, so the invertebrate communities in the soil, and the biology of the soil is what I'm really interested in. These days, though, I actually use a lot of molecular methods to look at communities in soil. So I use DNA methods. So we basically take bits of soil and extract DNA out of them and look to see what's there. And these are basically the standard tools that are now used to look at microbial communities, which has been talked about a lot in terms of agricultural soil. So bacterial, fungal, archaeal communities. If you want to know what's there, the only real way to do that is to use DNA techniques, which is what I'm doing. But there's a sort of cautionary tool there, point there that I'll come back to, that these are very much research tools and potentially quite expensive tools. So how we integrate that into sort of farming assessments is another thing, really. So what's my interest in strip tilling? Well, Carolyn and other people at the Soil Association approached me and some of my colleagues at the University of Plymouth and asked us if we would be able to look at some of the soils on some strip till trials in Devon and in the southwest. And actually so this is pretty early days of our involvement in these trials, and we're looking quite broadly at soil parameters, so physical, chemical, and my role is to look at the biological parameters of those soils. We did some early assessments this summer on looking at legacy effects of strip tilling into maize in a field that's now been planted with barley, I think. And actually, from the biology point of view, the results are pretty inconclusive. So it's very difficult for us to see sort of differences between the different cultivation methods in the techniques that we were using. And I think this sort of brings me on to one of the big challenges. So, I'm a researcher by training, and by trade, I guess. And actually, for us, collecting robust data from agricultural fields is one of the biggest challenges when we're trying to look at effects of cultivation methods. So what I might need in terms of numbers of samples is not something I could ever ask anyone to go out and do in their farm. Because if I want to see difference and I want to monitor things over the year, you need lots and lots of replicates to be able to do that. So I think one of the challenges that we need to address is sort of how do we bring researchers and farmers closer together so that we can have discussions about what actually might work in terms of data collection, so that we can actually get results that show something, like give useful advice to people. And I guess the other challenge is something that Lizzie also spoke about, is that every farm is different, so every field is different. And when I think about microbiology, for example, that can change within a few meters, well, within less than a few meters, within a few centimeters in the soil. It matters if you're next to roots or not next to roots, depending what you'll find. And so that variability is something that's a big challenge that we need to kind of be able to overcome when we're thinking about how do we see if these things are actually working or not. So I suppose I just wanted to end. So at Plymouth, we've just been awarded some money to set up a centre for us to be able to work with food producers, including farmers. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is promote closer working with the industry so that we can actually ask and answer the questions that are really important to people.
Thank you, Jenny. That's fantastic. I think my comment as a grower is that we also need to include machinery. Although we're talking about the soil and the health, we can't create soil health without having the right machinery to do the job. And that sometimes is a challenge for some smaller growers especially. And we rely on some of the larger growers and some of the more sort of stable businesses to explore these options before we can, as smaller growers, adapt these techniques and maybe make our own machinery. So I want to try and broaden it out into as many areas as possible, but obviously we're still concentrating on strip tillage and that. So I'll dive into questions. If there's some questions from the audience, then we can really start to explore what we mean. Hello, sir.
Great, thank you for that. Anyone on the panel got any experience with root vegetables? Because doing that at scale, commercially viable for strip till, min till, no till, is going to be a challenge. And just wondered what your thoughts were on that, or what your experience is with that.
Yeah, I'm just growing brassicas on the top, as it were. Now, I do grow chard, which actually it's sort of like it does root more deeply, and chard works really well with it. But obviously, it's top growth. But obviously, it would be similar to beetroot or to any of those sort of root types, and it does seem to do quite well at that. I think it's got to be looked at, because it's. I mean, a lot of the guys do use min till now for potato growing in our area. So they just subsoil it, rotere it, and then in some cases. So they're not ploughing at all in our area.
Is that organically? Because that sounds great if you're using glyphosate.
Yeah.
But organically, how do you deal with that? And therefore,
yeah, there is a problem.
If you use min till, no till, then there's slugs, wireworm, weeds, and they're all right against you.
I would agree. The problem with it is a problem if you're actually going to be if you're farming organically, the problem is that slugs are a big issue. I find even in our system we struggle with slugs because they tend to they obviously love that environment. So it's about how you manage that and how we can work around that is a problem as far as I see.
Thank you, Chris. I'll just intervene there. There's another grower friend of mine, Andy, who's been doing these trials for him. He's had good success with beans, all sorts of beans, strawberries, not so well with courgettes, calabres and spinach. So that implies and beetroot. I don't think he had very good success with beetroot either. So that implies that what you're saying is absolutely right, and that as organic grower, I would say that's where I would be slightly concerned, is how you produce a carrot seed bed. Very, very tricky, I suspect. So, yeah, a lot more research, I suspect, needs to be done on that, especially organic. Lizzie or Jenny?
Yeah, the growers and the researchers that I've come across that have looked at strip till have been looking at it in brassica crops. So, no, I haven't come across anyone looking in those crops. So, first of all, I wanted to chuck the question back to you. What you're asking it, is it something that you've looked at or interested in?
I've recently joined a large organic root veg family farm. It is very large. We do 400 acres of spuds a year and about the same of carrots. But that's deep ploughing, 12 inches of ploughing for all sorts of reasons, to create the seed bed, to desiccate slugs, to disturb wireworm, and doing that organically without disturbance of the soil and do it at a commercial level successfully. I think that's going to be a struggle. That's not to say it can't be done, which is why I'm here picking everyone's brains, really. But that's no small feat.
If I can come in, I think the issue is traditionally we've always ploughed, and that's been the way to go because that is the way to deal with it, and that's what we've done for centuries. I mean, that's what the plough does, because otherwise you would struggle to control the weeds, and that was a way of getting that clean black soil to actually grow your crop into. And I think there's trying to do it differently. We have to really, thinking outside the box, and it will take a bit of time to work out how you can do that. And that's where the scientists need to come in and trying to give us a hand to bring it around.
Can I add one more thing? I think from a sort of a soils perspective, we've been sucked into a cycle of cultivation. And the more we work and we cultivate, our soils, we damage that structure, we degrade the soil. And then we're then forced into that cycle where we need to cultivate. So, it's having that focus on a whole suite of management practices that can, over time, build and repair the quality of our soils that will then make what you're talking about potentially easier to try.
Yeah, we have a 7-year cycle, and within that, there's 2 years of cereals, barley and oats, both spring, also herbal lays and a legume fallow. So that's to build up the soil health before we then smash it to bits, basically, because we haven't found a way of not smashing it to bits, but getting good carrots, healthy carrots that people are going to want to buy in a supermarket.
I think that's obviously I didn't go into my rotation. I tend to do two crops of kale, and then it may be a crop of chard, and then basically it's into a cover crop for like 2 to 3 years, and then back in again because to build the fertility up of the soil and just build the soil health back up again. So that's a factor. So we're not going to forget about that.
I think there's some serious challenges with root crops, to be fair, and that came out in the UK horticulture session yesterday. Guy Watson was saying, that they smash it to bits. They say exactly the same as you, and he's quite embarrassed by that in some ways. But to change that system organically, especially because I'm no experience of conventional, but to change that organically is very, very hard to work out. I mean, I'm a shallow plougher, proponent because that's what I do, and I've got a very small plough, and that's what I do, and I feel okay about that. And I'm not gonna worry too much about it because I need to produce a commercial crop, as you say, which is actually is going to sell. So we've got to be realistic. And only 2% of the land in this country is horticultural. So it might be that we have to do that bit of sacrificial stuff, but I'm not saying that. But the exploration I think is needed. And that's why I think this is a really important session actually. So anyone else want to comment before we go to the next question? No. Okay. Next. Yes, please.
I'm not a veg grower whatsoever, but we're farmers. Yeah. Does it mean that in reality, what we've got to do is put? In reality, we've actually got to put the crops in the correct place. So can we grow carrots on really light land, and when you can do min-till, we've been working in a system where you can almost put anything anywhere kind of thing, because we can do so much to the soil. You know, maybe we just have to change the way that we do things.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very interesting comment. Thank you. Next question, sir, in the middle.
Hi there, Harry from UK Agritech Centre. Just a comment relating to the root cropping. So as part of our Potato Light project over 4 years, and we're just into the second year now, we're trialling different low-intensity tillage systems for potatoes, not organic, only conventional, including strip tillage. And 2 types of minimum tillage and novel destoning technology working with Grimmer, PepsiCo and McCain. So we should have some results coming out of that, probably presented at CUPGRA later on in the year. That's just the first comment. My question was really for Jenny, which was around whether you can utilise any fractionation techniques to learn more about the microbiome, because certainly when I was working with soil microaggregates, I found that actually, if you start fractioning out the mineral-associated organic matter from your lighter organic matter, you can start to build up a clearer picture of where changes might be occurring in the microbiome, because usually they're changing more dynamically in the less well-bound fractions. So I just wondered whether it was something you'd explored, fractionating and exploring different components of the soil.
So exploring fractionation, so sort of separate, no, is the straight answer to that. We haven't explored that, but you would expect to see that. But I think one of the issues with the microbiome, or with looking at the microbiome in particular, is that it's incredibly variable. And actually, I think we probably need to be looking at and what is a good microbiome in one soil is not necessarily a good microbiome in a different soil, that you're trying to get different things from. And it sort of depends what you want to do with your soil. So if your goal is to, so for example, if you want to increase carbon input or store carbon into your soil, that's a different thing from if you want to actually be able that to be a fertile soil to be able to grow things in. I kind of feel that actually one of the things that we need to do is to link microbiome changes to things that we can see, because then that would be much easier for people to be able to look for them. So to look at the microinvertebrates and the invertebrates in the soil, which I think actually might be quite a good indicator of soil health. But yeah, I would expect different things to be going on in different bits of the soil. I don't know if that particularly answers your question or not. I mean, the real answer is no, we don't have lots of information about that, but it's a very sensible suggestion.
Thank you, Jenny. I think, sorry, sir, do you want to? Yeah. I think that suggests we need a lot more research and development on this. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I come here as a maize grower trying to pick the brains of vegetable growers. We were one of the trial sites of the trial that Lizzie was referencing with DEFRA about 12 years ago now. And ever since then, we've been continuing with our strip till work, now with concept strip till, but we are desperately looking for a living mulch that we can use with maize. Are you using living mulches in vegetable production, and have you got something that is non-competitive with maize?
I'm playing around with that too, and it's a work in progress. And I came across it because actually we'd left a piece of field uncultivated. We'd put cover crop in the field, and we left a piece. It was late coming out, and we just left it. It wasn't only a strip. It wasn't worth sowing, so we just topped everything, kept topping it for 2 years, and we got eventually a sort of like the natural small clovers developing on it, and so I actually did a strip till into that, and then actually didn't destroy that cover and just left it in to see what happens, and it sort of worked, even in my conventional system. Now, so the argument for you would be looking at some of those the really small leaf clovers, and also possibly, you know, things like trefoil and stuff like that stay low. And whether you can establish those in the maize crop and deal with it, that might be an option, because they're not as competitive, and I would think that would be it. And they give you good cover. And and it's the classic it's those natural clovers that naturally come in, because, you know, they're stoloniferous and they just sort of creep across the ground and just take over. And they're quite impressive when you get them working, you know, so that's worth looking at.
And I hope you're not embarrassed by bringing maize into it, because I think maize is an amazingly, you know, important area to be looking at in terms of our soil runoff, you know, and not only in vegetables, but certainly in maize crops. Yeah.
Well, certainly strip tillers work very well for us, but we are trying to reduce the amount of chemical we use, and but we do have natural white clover everywhere. So I think it would probably dominate the lower growing ones. We don't establish any clover in our lays, but it's just there.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry, madam. Sorry.
Good morning. My name is Jen. I'm intensive vegetable organic in Belgium, and I'm apologize we arrived late at the session, so perhaps you addressed a couple of my questions. But we've been experimenting the last couple of years with undersowing, relay cropping, and have strip till sort of on our radar to further explore. And I have a couple questions. One is related to the composition of the cover crop that's next to the vegetables, especially with the new insights about the importance of sufficient diversity in cropping. I'm also curious about whether you're working with we work on beds of 1.50 meters wide, and whether you're just looking at just taking a strip out of the middle of that, or also looking at alternating beds, 1.50 meters with vegetables, 1.50 meters, or wider with cover cropping. And I'm curious, particularly with the underground interaction, about the distance between your cover crop and your vegetable, and what about that? And that's one of the reasons why we've been trying to work with undersowing, which has a series of other challenges connected to it.
Chris.
So I'll try and address some of those. I've had some success with the using the micro clovers, I call them, and I think that's the way to go. And using trefoil, those types of things, getting them established. I've struggled to get them established every year because obviously just the weather and everything else. When I can get on, this is the problem with all of this. We go on about all these ideas. It's great, but actually making it happen year on year with the weather conditions can be a problem. So you just have to be aware of it. But if you can get them in and established, I think they're quite useful. It's about low growing and not getting to, because, you know, red clover is great for the field and everything. It's vigorous and everything else. It's too vigorous. You can't use that in a system. You have to take that out, or don't have it in the system for your cover crops. We use a system. It's 61 centimeters between strip tills, and it's like it's 5. 3 meters basically wide, 5 rows, and then so it just works for our system. It works for brassicas, and just strip till into sort of like, you know, straight into a stubble like that. That's how we do it. Interaction with the other crops, yes, I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. All I would say is that if you dig the soil up, it's quite impressive how well the roots move into the soil. I would say it takes a bit longer for the crop to establish. It's about, I would say, they're 2 weeks slower than a standard conventional system, but it wants to get going, they're off, and the roots get everywhere as far as I can see. It's really interesting how people say. I think maybe the main tap root will follow the main where you've put your strip till in, but the adventitious roots are going out sideways into everything else, and it's important what Lizzie said about the quality of your soil. So if you've got the worms there already and you've got everything working in the soil, then those wormholes give the plant the access, and they're off. All you're doing with the strip till is just creating that environment just to get your small plants going. and then they go off and they'll spread right through, and they interact with the other crops inside. The problem is it's just you've got an issue there with your cover crop because it wants the nutrients as well, so you're having to work between the two, and how do you deal with that? So it's about having something that's not too isn't too what's the word for it? Competitive. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I guess you have to differentiate between where we're strip tilling into a cover crop where we're destroying that cover crop, or where you're strip tilling in something where you're trying to maintain the cover. Just to add, James Rome, a grower up in Scotland, he commented to me about the mixes that they've used. He said that they've had success with Phacelia-based mixes, and they've used Phacelia, buckwheat and black oat. He did say to me, not rye, wouldn't go anywhere near with that. And he said the challenge with that is he said the roots tend to ball up, and then it's trickier planting. Is that similar to you?
To be honest, rye, I found rye to be fine. A rye vetch mix is one of my favourite mixes to use in the spring. I established that sort of mid-spring, late spring. And then we're obviously planting kale crops into it, or brassica crops in later on, July into the beginning of August. And because I can control it with a bit of chemistry, I find those really useful because I can just sort of like, I'll use a low dose of Roundup, and that takes out the rye. It's still there, but it takes it out. And then the vetch comes back from that. So I have the vetch there still as a ground cover when my crop's starting to go. Because obviously the problem is you put this in and you've got your crop in, but then you've got 6 weeks before you've got any sort of ground cover again, at least that. So you know we're saying but if you destroy your cover completely, it's not ideal. You want to keep it in if you can, because you destroy cover. But you've got to destroy the cover, otherwise the ground, it's getting it right and getting the right contact. Anyway, but what I find is that's then later on, I can then destroy the vetch later on once it's starting to compete with my crop, and obviously that's a conventional way of doing it, and it won't necessarily work for organic systems. But I'm trying to keep something growing on the soil all the time, and there's no I don't want any black soil if I can get away with it in a perfect system. Not easy to do.
Thank you, Chris. I think what all that highlights clearly is attention to detail, as Lizzie was saying. And Andy Dibben, who's done some work on the market garden side of this organically, there's a phrase called shade avoidance response, and I think that's clear that we have to be, cognizant of this, what's happening with some of these, competition from the sides, or competition, depending on what system you set up, there's going to be certain, outcomes from that. So I think, everything really is dependent on what you want to achieve. But the mix, I think, is also quite vital. And Andy's I've got a whole page of stuff he sent me yesterday about mixes. And I think that might be useful to be the experimentation that he's been doing. And there's a lot of detail in that, and I can't explain it. I haven't got enough time to explain it. But those mixes, I think, are really important. So I think Chris has been alluding to that. And we need to have some of this put out there, and so growers can then pick the bits that they want out of that. Try again.
I've been following Andy online.
Well done.
And do you know, is he mowing his strips?
Yeah, he's mowing. Yeah, I mean, it's very, very different to what Chris is doing. So, but I think to have these different growers experimenting different ways is going to help us all ultimately to create our own systems. We're never going to be all the same, but we're going to just pick a mix from what we're seeing.
Yeah, I've been looking at the mowing idea as well, rather than using the chemical means, because I think that's an option for me as well if I can make it work. It's just trying to find the piece of kit that will do the work for you. It's like having I need 5 small lawnmowers in effect. Then they have to manage with the odd stone that gets in the way. So it's just trying to work out what would work, And if you can do that, that would work, And then you could actually just keep it mown, keep it low, and then your crop takes over, and that's great, if you can make it work.
Well, Andy Cato's done a lot of work with this at one of the farms that he's got, and he's got some really intricate mowers, and he asked me if I wanted to do some horticultural trials with these mowers, but of course they don't work for a horticultural system. They're designed for arable systems, so we can't just swap between different systems. Right, any more questions from the floor?
So I started with what he wanted to do with the mulch rows between my maize, and I needed a way to control it, so I found 5 Honda motors and commercial lawnmower blades mounted on a frame and have been experimenting with that for about 5 years now.
I think that highlights that the machinery issue could be quite a big one because, it's difficult to get people like Garford or something to actually develop this stuff if we don't have the research and development that we can prove that it actually works. So that interaction between machinery developers and us as growers on the ground is going to be a tricky one, but we need the research first, yeah.
Mine was a lot of junkyard engineering by inventory.
I'm sure that's what all of us do.
we all do that.
Yeah, we'd like to
Join
see
the
a photo of
club.
that.
Yes.
Great, that's great, thank you. Right at the back. Sorry, long journey. I think a couple of seconds.
Hello. I work on a market garden in Evesham, and we've been doing the alternating beds and then mowing and various mixtures, and we've got 4 mowers, so we're trialling it this year and we'll probably write about it later.
Is that organic?
Yeah.
Yep.
Small scale, in tunnels, out in the field, market garden. So.
Are you part of a trial or not?
No.
Would you want to be?
Yes, I guess so.
Great, we'll find you afterwards. Well done.
One comment I would make is actually to do with mulch, and applying a mulch to your cover. In effect, so I'm actually having a go using mulch obviously I have a cover crop growing on a field alongside, and I'll harvest that and then apply it to the field I'm growing my kale on, for nitrogen and a whole range of other things. But obviously, the good thing about the mulches is it actually has a allelopathic effect, so it actually then controls the weeds as well. And I'm not sure whether it is so good in an established crop, but it will. You could in effect smother it to some extent. So that might be an option to try.
My radar started to prickle when I heard allelopathic effect, because when we try and grow carrots after rye, it can be a real issue. So I think we need to be a bit careful about, after what you've said about the carrot growing, that if you don't, you've got to have a 6-week gap really between the rye and establishing a carrot crop. So, anything else? Sorry, 5 minutes. We've got 5 minutes. Yes, sir, in the front.
I think what we've highlighted is a lack of machinery available. As a small market gardener that I work with, we're using things, even adapting old horse-drawn machinery and stuff from that should be in a museum to work. So I personally have a trial where I'm trying to grow vegetables within an existing lay in strips. So I leave 300 mil of the grass, then I have 900 mil that I cultivate, and I'm growing root crops. I'm growing everything that I could grow conventionally within those strips. And it's organic, the only addition is irrigation. And I'm getting successful yields. It is purely on a very small scale, but I think with the correct machinery, it is scalable. And I also think the danger is that we just try and do everything on a big scale with machinery that's too big, too heavy, too cumbersome. There's a temptation to go in when the soil's not right. You need things that are far more you can do more delicate operations when the soil is at the peak time to do it, rather than going and causing so much damage that we do.
I think that's why different scaled trials are really important. So what Andy's doing and what Chris is doing, I mean, these different, and Riverford are part of that trial as well. I mean, Riverford have had some issues with irrigation. You mentioned irrigation. They found that... I
use trickle tape.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what irrigation Riverford used, but they essentially found that that some crops were short of water, and there was some competition from the cover crop for that water.
I consider also that it's not so much a cover crop. I'm developing a channel within an existing system, microbiome. So I think there's probably more transfer. It's transfer both ways. It's not all competition with a cover crop. I think you're getting things back from the...
Sure.
I'd say, as to do with the irrigation, I don't use irrigation because we don't need it in the West ever much. Okay, famous last words. I'll probably be irrigating next week. But anyway, it rains too much. The The thing is, when we do get dry conditions, the problem is your cover crop does take it out, takes the moisture out, and so that's the thing you have to be aware of. That it's a good thing that it takes moisture out when it's wet, and this is why I'm talking. It's about resilience. We're talking about resilience here and how we can. I mean, that's the other reason why I'm really keen and passionate about strip till and any of these other systems we're just talking about. It's important to look at that because it's about resilience. It's because things are getting more difficult. All farmers and growers will tell you this. The weather is not great. It's variable. The variability. It's dry. It's hot. It's cold. It's wet, and it's ways we can actually make us more resilient in these situations. And I think strip till and some of these things we discussed are really useful to do that, and it's important we work on it because I think it means you can get crops in. For instance, I was going to explain that this strip tilling a cover crop. We strip tilled kale into into a cereal crop. Cereal stubble this autumn. The only chance we would have got that crop in was doing strip till because we got so much rain. We still lost some of the crop because of the wet, but the point is we had a crop to sell in the spring because we could do it, and it allows you to do that.
Thank you, Chris. Great. I think we're getting there, aren't we, Caroline? 2 minutes. Anyone else for anyone? So, gentlemen, I know he's from New Zealand, so hello.
Hi. Just a quick comment. In New Zealand, there's quite a big trial happening on an organic farm, field scale, looking at not quite strip tillage, but growing specific cover crop mixes and then crimping that in place and then direct planting through that. And I wonder if there's any research like that happening here.
I've actually had a go at that with the rye vetch mix where we actually put the crimper down. It does work. So what you do is you grow your rye vetch and it grows quite tall, and you put your crimper on and then crimp it on the front, push it down, and then put your strips on the back and then follow it, or put it on the tractor and follow it afterwards. Obviously, you've got to go the same way as you've knocked it down, otherwise you end up with problems. So we worked that one out. And of course, the classic is that your rye vetch gets quite tall and goes over the other way, and then you're going to cross it again. So it's about just getting the right balance on that. We struggle with crimping. We've tried it. It doesn't really work in our wet conditions. You need that dry weather.
Thank you, Chris. I think we're nearly there. I just want to say, given that growers are the sort of canaries in the mine, for climate change, that this area of work is really important, I suggest, and that we do need to build more resilience in our systems. We've all struggled with the weather in the last couple of years, especially as Chris said. And although we come from different geographical areas and different countries, we are going to struggle if we don't get some of these techniques in place fairly rapidly. So I really feel this is an important area of work. So thank you to the panel. Fantastic explanations of where we are at the moment, where we kind of want to start going to. And thank you to all of you for turning up and asking some super questions. Thank you. Very, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.